Hi, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Kit, and on the channel we talk about all things quilting as well as some other crafts that involve fabric that are near and dear to my heart. Today we are talking specifically about how to join the ends of binding when you are machine sewing the binding to the top of your quilt so that you can fold it over to the back for hand stitching. So today I'm going to talk about my favorite way to join the ends to get a really nice professional look that makes it so that you really can't tell where you started and ended with the binding. So let's start with looking at the placemat. I will very roughly look for the middle of the placemat. So I will either measure the length and pick the middle, or I can fold it over to get the middle. Whatever method allows me to generally determine what the middle of the bottom edge of the item that I'm putting binding on. So in this case, I know that there is a bit of decoration, so I'm going to mark an X there. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's just a way to generally join your binding in the middle of the project that you're working on so that you don't get into working with anything that's a corner, because those corners you have to flip in a way that it's just easier if you're not contending with that. So I mark my middle of the project, and I know that if I have a full 12 inches to work with, it's the easiest to handle the way that I'm going to join this in the end. So I will use my ruler, mark from the X back 6 inches, and then I will mark from the X this way 6 inches. And again, it's just giving me a nice big space to work when I start joining this. And I'll show you that. You'll see why I do this in just a second. So once I have made my marks, I take my project over to the sewing machine. So the first thing that I do is I lay the end of my binding on the X that I have marked. And then I match this up, and this is going to be a tail that I'm going to leave loose so that I can use it to join later. And then I look for the straight line that I created, which is about 6 inches from that spot. And I come down here, put my project on there. This is a 1/4 inch foot, so I know that if I run this along the edge, I'll have a 1/4 inch. And I start sewing. I can back up a few stitches. And I am going to sew down to the corner, and I can see the very corner of the edge there, and I know that if I run it to a certain spot on my presser foot, I'm a 1/4 inch from that end. Then once I do that, flip it, and I run my stitches off the diagonal, and I can cut my thread. So you can see at this point I have a tail that's about 6 inches long. It goes to about the middle of the project, and I've started sewing here and I'm working my way out. So just as a reminder for anybody who might be still learning to quilt, I will then lay my binding so that it's aligned along this side, and I want this to be a 45-degree angle, so all of that's nice and well lined up. And then I'm going to lay this down, and when I lay this down, I should be able to feel that angled piece on the bottom. I should have this squared up, and this should be squared up right along the edge of this project. Then I put it back under the needle, and I sew, and we're going to go all the way around this placemat doing this. Come to my next corner. Again, I can just barely see the corner of the project. Run that right up and cut the thread. Okay, and then we can do the same step again. I want this binding to be running exactly along the edge. I want a nice straight 45-degree angle here, and then I want to lay this back down so that it's lined up here, it's straight here, and it's right along the edge of the placemat here. Put this back on the sewing machine and run along the next edge. I'm keeping this lined up against the edge. Okay, so we're going to repeat that nice angled, straight, matching right along the edge. This matches along the edge. Put it back on the machine. And sometimes that corner wants to hold up a little bit. Okay, make sure that I'm lined up there nice and straight. Okay, so now we're on the last corner, so we will repeat the corner technique. And now I'm looking for the straight line that I had marked that's 6 inches from this middle spot. So I'm going to lay this down here, and I know that that is generally right about here. Again, doesn't have to be exact. Put this on here. Okay, I'm looking here, my little straight line is right about here. Okay, a few back stitches and cut the project. So now we're at the point where we're going to join this, and I have quite a bit of binding here because I have 5 more placemats to do. So what I like to do is I lay this down so that I can just see the end of the piece that I started with, the tail that I started with. So I know that that's just right there. And I want to lay this down nice and smooth. So I want to bring my ruler back over here, and I want to measure from the end of the bottom piece over 2.5 inches, and I'll mark that just so you'll kind of know. So that's 2.5 inches over, and I'm using the measurement of 2.5 inches because my binding strip was 2.5 inches, and you'll understand why in just a minute. So from that mark, which is the end of the thing, over 2.5 inches, I will make a mark. Okay, and that happens to be right on top of that ant. And I will use some scissors to cut the top piece, leaving that bottom piece. When I'm done, I want an overlap of 2.5 inches. So I will use my scissors, and sometimes I will cut it in like maybe 1/8 of an inch, just so I don't have too much gather here. Okay, so that is how we cut it. Let's turn this around now. So now that we've turned this around, we will open up the top strip, and we will open up the bottom strip, and usually I kind of pull this so that my project folds over to give me a little more room. And we will match up the corners at a 45-degree angle, nice and smooth. I will put another pin in here just to give it stability while I'm working with it. Okay, now once I've done that, I want a line that goes from that corner to that corner. And once you've done this a couple million times, you probably can do that without a line, but for the purposes of demonstration, I'm lining it up to, let's see here, underneath I can see the corner, so I'm at that corner, and then the other side is at the top corner. And then from there, we will just give it a little mark so that when we're sewing, we sew a straight line. So I come back over to the sewing machine. Project is folded so that this will lay flat, and this is why I've left myself 12 inches to work with, to just make this step a little less cumbersome. Otherwise, it wants to fold up. So then I will follow the line that I marked, and I will go from one corner to the other. So you can see I have drawn that line and I have sewn from one corner to the other corner. Okay. Now I always like to do a dry fit where I pull this down and I make sure, even with the seam allowances in there, I make sure that this is going to lay nice and flat, and I'm not going to have any issues with that at all. Once I'm sure that I've done this correctly, I fold this back over again. Okay. And I bring my scissors back over. And I might have a bigger pair of scissors. And I'm cutting the seam allowance off. Okay. So now what I like to do to press this, just because I don't want to have to get up and go over to the iron, I happen to have a by Annie tool that allows you to kind of press that in place with the pressure of the bottom of the thing. So I do that. And once that's done, we lay this back down so that it matches up nice and flat. And then I will go back to the sewing machine and I will sew from where I left off all the way across to where I left off here. And that will complete the joining of the binding. So we'll put that on the sewing machine. I want to make sure this is all lined up nice. I want to make sure it's laying flat. Okay. I don't want anything to be out of place. All the way to the end. Take it off the machine. Okay. So we have joined, we have a full binding all the way around. We've done our corners correctly. And now you can see that there's no way to tell around this project. There's no way to tell that this is where I ended, because there will be places all along where there might be binding. That's my favorite method for joining projects, and this works with the biggest quilts down to these small little placemat projects or throw pillows or anything else you're doing. So I hope that was helpful. If it was, please like the video, subscribe to the channel. We'll have other videos that are shorter videos like this that show one specific type of technique. If you're new to quilting, this might be a good reference channel to subscribe to, so that you can come back and look at these videos as you finish your quilts and your projects. So thank you for being here and have a great day.